I'm Chris Nessie, host of Behind the Mic, Voices of the EPN, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Chris Jenson, MD, and he shares his book, Triage Your School, A Physician's Guide to Preventing Teacher Burnout. Oh, this is so timely. What an amazing book with practical tips to help alleviate burnout in schools. You're going to learn so much. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you helped out the podcast. And here's 3 ways you could do that. 1, tell a friend and share links. 2, go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And how about 3, click on the link on my website homepage to buy me a coffee. By doing this, you could donate $1 or 2 to help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That would be so cool. Thanks for listening. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
What do we do? And so I started scaling ideas from healthcare. And healthcare has got its problems. Oh my gosh, we could have a podcast on that. But one thing that they do well is workflow management or efficiency. And why that mattered was if you look at all the things that principals, superintendents, and teachers need, at the top of just about everyone's list is more time.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Dr. Christopher Jenson proudly serves as a senior health advisor with experience as a former emergency medicine physician, CDC Science Ambassador Fellow, and nationally recognized educator. He is passionate about designing solutions for school leaders as they navigate complex health challenges in the educational space. Our focus will be Dr. Jenson's book, Triage Your School, A Physician's Guide to Preventing Teacher Burnout. Dr. Jenson, Chris, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to this talk, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, glad to have you here, and you have created an awesome book, and the timing of it is just perfect. I gotta ask this though. Your medical profession started in emergency medicine. I mean, could you talk about lessons that you may have learned while working in this field? Because kudos to you for working in that field. Oh my gosh, man, I don't.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, my wife would tell you that my life has been guided by serendipity and, favorable moments. But no, I went through the classic pathway in America to become an ER physician. I did my undergrad and med school and residency training. And I really enjoyed it, and I worked for quite some time as an ER physician. And one of the things that I unexpectedly started to fall in love with while working in clinical settings was teaching medical students and residents at the bedside. That was something that I had no idea I would enjoy. And so as we fast forwarded through life, everyone's got a plan, right? And we discovered that our plans had to change because once we had kids, it was like, wow, my schedule's a disaster. My wife was also a physician. And so I was looking for something else that I thought I would enjoy. And I straight up jumped to teaching high school, based on the presumption that, well, if I could teach kids at the bedside, maybe I can teach them in the classroom. And wow, was that ignorant. But I eventually learned how to become an effective teacher and taught high school science for about 10 years before I blended both careers back together and started consulting on health issues in the educational space.
Well, that's cool. And just a note, I seem to be one of those people who ends up having to to see medical professionals once in a while. And I can only tell you that I'm really thankful for people to figure out how to put you back together again after you've done something stupid, like fall out of a tree or, fall down a hill or something like that. So.
Well, yeah, that's kind of you to say. And I've worked with some fantastic nurses and physicians over the years who I admire as well. But, what we don't share with patients is we do the same silly things. We just don't want to let you know about it.
Nice. That's funny. I like that. That's good because normally I'm the one getting chewed out. Why did you do this?
Yeah.
Well, it seemed like it was a good idea at the time. Yeah. But good to know. All right, so let's shift to your book, Triage Your School, A Physician's Guide to Preventing Teacher Burnout. What inspired you to write Triage Your School?
It came from a series of presentations. And so, funny enough, while I worked on many different health issues in education, like vaping, opioid abuse, asthma protocols, just a lot of things that school leaders can imagine and relate to that they deal with on a daily basis. I really started plunging more over the last 3 years into student mental health. And it was a topic that fascinated me and I saw a need for it. And as I was diving into it, there was like a very progressive, obvious knowledge that staff were struggling too. And so all of a sudden, I started doing some research there and looking at it, and folks started inviting me to come talk to their schools about what can we do to deal with some of the stress points for staff, and how can we create a better work environment? And, based on the limited parameters that schools can adapt to and manage, what do we do? And so I started scaling ideas from healthcare, and healthcare has got its problems. Oh my gosh, we could have a podcast on that. But one thing that they do well is workflow management or efficiency. And why that mattered was, if you look at all the things that principals, superintendents, and teachers need, at the top of just about everyone's list is more time. I wish I had more time. And so I sat down and said, wait, I can do that. I can scale some of these operations to give educators more time. And I already know they work. I know what has failed miserably in healthcare, but I also know, especially coming out of the ER, where time matters. What is something that is practical to scale to schools and could actually buy back educators more time. And so that's where it came from. After a series of presentations and enough encouragement from people that were strangers, because your friends will tell you anything nice, but a true stranger is where you get your best feedback. And they said, you need to write this out. You need to go do it. And so I was fortunate to partner with Solution Tree, and it's been awesome to see the book make an impact.
That's cool. So I got to ask this question. And you went from emergency medical room, the medical emergency room, and working and all that, and you go to being a science teacher. Didn't that the pace kind of change a little bit for you?
Oh yeah, financially, it was the worst decision of my life.
Nice.
And I think I have permission to laugh about that because I willingly accepted that salary change. And so if there's anyone that's arguing educators should be paid more, trust me, I'm on your team.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a gigantic shift. But to be honest with you, not only did I do it to help manage internally our own family, I loved teaching. I loved it. And I was looking for a better way to make our family run that still allowed me to engage in a passion. And what I did not realize when I fully jumped into it was how hard it was. How hard quality school leaders are pulled in an infinite number of directions, no matter what title they wear, department chair, principal, assistant principal, CNI, whatever, including teachers. And so I started adapting just kind of naturally. Okay, well, this is a multitask situation, or this is a situation where I have more demands than I have time. And I just started using what I'd been living on in the ER in my classroom, and other teachers were like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, that seems to work. And well, I was not the best teacher in the building, nor the brightest. I had some things that worked, and I shared them with my friends, and it all just launched out of that.
That's so cool. It really is. And it's always neat to.
But the one thing I have to share with you is there's a joke that some days I would say the high school science classroom was crazier than the ER. and I would be like, oh, if I could only go back to the calm.
That's funny. That's nice. That says a lot. The calm of the ER.
It does.
Very cool.
So,
having been someone who not too far recently tumbled down a hill, hit a rock, and walked into the room with a towel on my head and lots of blood down the front of my shirt and stuff. That says a lot, man.
It does. And I say that in the most loving fashion, but when you really think about it, though, jokes aside, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, there are a lot of similarities between caretaking that takes place in a rapid environment in a hospital setting and caretaking that takes place in a school. And they have completely different missions, completely different supplies and logistics. I fully appreciate that, having worked both jobs. But fundamentally, a lot of those caretaking aspects are the same. And that's why I felt confident you could pull some of these operations, from caretakers in a hospital to caretakers in a school. And again, that was one of the things that precipitated the book. But yeah, I mean, for those that read it, I do use some of that same sarcastic tone and levity, when I make these comparisons between the hospital and the school. And I think some of them are very justifiable comparisons. So
I can only imagine, having worked in schools, not in the ER, but I can't imagine how you could make us having been in both. So what a cool connection there. All right. So in the introduction of Triage Your School, you comment this: we can't afford to half-heartedly place a bandage on the symptoms of burnout. That strategy would provide only a temporary fix, generating further frustration somewhere down the road when exhaustion, isolation, anxiety, and hopelessness inevitably will reemerge. All right, let's talk about that.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, that was one of the driving forces for me internally as to why I wanted to write the book. And so this is not meant to be an attack in any way on the confines of typical school districts, but there are so many things, right, that schools are under the pressure of doing, and other duties as assigned are exploding, and outside stakeholders are influencing what schools do. And there's a lot of pressure, and that extends from the superintendent down to the para who's working, hard with individual kids. But as you look at it really, and you try and step back from the emotion and the chaos, we're losing the capacity to run schools well. And why I say that is because look at the data over the last couple of years. I'm going to pull some stats from U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, National Center for Education Statistics, and a couple articles of Education Week. And I don't think anyone's gonna be shocked, but in 2022, post-pandemic, everyone's reeling no matter what their job was. And 59% of teachers and principals met the clinical criteria for exhaustion. This was a survey of about 2,700. And that was not surprising. That really wasn't. And everyone just assumed it'd get better. In 2023, when you look at it, there were still more than 55,000 teaching vacancies in K through 12. And teachers were quitting at a rate of about 270,000 a year, which was up than expected. And we're now a couple of years removed. And if you're wondering what's going on this year, preliminary data suggests 4 out of 10 when surveyed. 4 out of 10 are contemplating leaving in the next 2 years for other careers. And so when I look at what's being done with well-meaning, well-constructed, there's nothing wrong about what's going on, but it's not sufficient. When you look at this data, it should stop a superintendent or an HR individual in their tracks and say, this has to be our number one priority. Because all those other things, learning loss or, dealing with student needs or whatever, what have you, good luck doing that without leaders in your front office and your classrooms. And so it's one of those things where it's unfortunate, but actually you have to take a step back and say, we've got to stop the slow metaphorical hemorrhage of educators leaving before we can attack these other issues. And the only way to stop that is to give them fully committed resources to make their work-life balance better, and look them in the eye and say, here's what we can't fix. Here's what we don't have the capacity or budget for, but here's what we can do for you. And we're all in on that, and then let the person make a decision. I think you give them the honesty of what you can realistically do. No one's Cinderella or the fairy godmother here. We got to work with what we have, but look them in the eye and I need you to stay. I adore what you do. You are fantastic. Here's in my sandbox of what I can do. Here's what I can do. And I'm all in on that. And that's what I think needs to be done. We cannot afford to look at these numbers that are right in front of us as red flags and not do anything.
You got that right. It's one of those things because, just like you said, that I don't know what your experience was in the classroom, but obviously it was enough that you compare it to an ER, and it's, it can be just something that it drains your energy. If you're focused on doing what needs to be done and all that sort of stuff, oh my gosh, yeah, you can be trying to fix this and fix that and do the right thing here and the right thing there. And the next thing you know is it's on the weekend and you're still grading papers at midnight and stuff like that and getting ready for whatever club you sponsored and stuff like that. And then going back to school on Monday.
Absolutely. And I think, I've been blessed to consult with a lot of school leaders around the nation, and they're good, brilliant people, and I think one of the things that has been challenging for them is to step outside the normal pathway of what we tend to do and say, this is not working and I'm going to have to be bold. And the answer I always give them is, which is more frightening for you? You not being able to fill your classrooms with competent people, or you stepping out and do something new that others might criticize? And then this decision becomes much easier.
Nice. That's a good question. All right. So let's look in some more into your book a little bit. At the beginning of part 1, Traveling the Lonely Path, Insight into Career Burnout, you note that in this section, you will be addressing the question, why have existing efforts to improve career satisfaction fallen short? So what do you think?
Yeah, I think schools, and I'm saying this again as someone who really loved being a teacher, and I'm proud of my time in education. So I'm not here to attack education, but as I step back now as a third-party consultant, I think there's a lot of quick fixes. We're trying to let me use the medicine analogy. You've got a bleeding artery of a problem and you're slapping a Band-Aid on it. And that's not going to fix anything.
Nice.
And so I think a lot of times school leaders at the top maybe feel a little bit futile in terms of, well, I have money constraints and budget constraints, and I get that. I don't pretend for a second that I could do a better job than some of these gifted superintendents, but we can be really creative and step outside the box in what we do with time. And, the funny thing about life is, I think as we all get older, we value our time more and more and more. And that's one thing we could be coming back to educators and say, regardless of what the state budget is, regardless of what federal mandates are, regardless of even what the state standards are, I can start scaling school operations to give you more time. I can make your work-life balance better. I can reset the expectations of our parents in this community and not see a drop-off in academics that's statistically significant, but yet get you out of the building quicker. And I say that because these operations that we're scaling from healthcare to schools are not theoretical. They're not just a book. I've been really fortunate to watch school districts adapt them and have it work. And, trust me, I was crossing my fingers and hoping for the best and sweating in my chair as they jumped in. And then when we saw the data and we saw the teacher opinions and feedback and we saw the out times, then it's like, okay, should have worked, but nice to know that it does. And, and I get it. It's been eye-opening for me to work with school leadership at the highest levels, and they are really good people and they really do want the best for their principals and teachers, but getting them to say, let's start borrowing from other career paths that have got this figured out, because as much as I love your friend, you don't. And let's start borrowing something that we know works and start there. And then you can continue to revise it and make it more education specific.
Yeah, I like that. It's there's so many things that I could spend this entire talk right here because of some of the conversations that I think need to happen, and well-meaning people think about them, but something just disappears in between the thought behind what maybe we should do something to it actually happening. So,
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about for just a minute. So looking at education, what are some of the causes of burnout?
Great question. If you look out at burnout in general, the first thing you realize very, very quickly is it's multifactorial. You can't point your finger in one direction only and blame it on that. The second thing is true burnout is not a bad week or even a bad month. It's finding yourself in a pervasive and persistent situation that you honestly don't see a likely improvement ahead of you, right? And that the juggernaut of inertia is so strong in this situation that you're probably not going to change it. And so when we look at educators, and I went through this in the book, but there's really 5 things. I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about, but there's 5 things if you boil a lot of their top complaints or top concerns down. And one is the expansion of workload in the face of less time, right? You're asking me to do more, and I have either the same amount of time to do it, which is already hard because you're asking me to do more, or you're asking me to do more and I have less time to do it, which is really hard. The second thing I would say is loss of control. And what I mean by that is everyone, whether it be a superintendent, a principal, a teacher, they're all making decisions. They're all decision makers. No one likes to be micromanaged. And we accept a certain amount of regulation on schools, like the state's going to tell you what to teach. We all know that. You should be aware. Don't get angry. You knew what you're buying into. But a lot of these outside pressure points and institutions, whether it be a university or parents in the community or, businesses, they want certain career skills, are trying to micromanage what happens inside of schools. And that varies as you go across the country as to what extent that happens and where the pressure points are. That varies in each community, but it's happening. And I think as educators feel like they're losing some of that autonomy, makes it hard to do your job. I mean, if you're being given prescriptive instructions, what are you really there for? One of the things educators do best is being creative. So, and then a third thing I would argue is feelings of isolation. And that's happened to a lot of people in different careers, but I think it's really happened a lot in education. Simply because, hey, let's state the obvious, right? Without diving into it, but we are in an election year, and education on both sides of the ticket will probably be polarized in one way or another. And so you can kind of feel isolated if you're caught in the middle, which is challenging. The fourth thing I would say for educators is, and this has really exploded and very much mirrors healthcare workers, and that is the inability to escape work. There are very few parents in America that would hold off on sending an email at any time to an educator to get questions in. They might even try and text them. It's bombarded with technology, cell phones, and they know they can get a message to you and they expect a prompt response. And that's tough. It used to just be, oh, hey, if you really want a night away, maybe don't go to a restaurant in your local town because you're going to see kids and their parents. Right. But now it doesn't matter. You can be in your home and ding, 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 the emails and texts are rolling in. And I think that's really exploded a lot more so in this tech age we live in. And then I would argue the fifth thing is pretty unique to caretakers in healthcare and caretakers in education, and that is the fear of disappointing others. I mean, that's something we really see in folks who are type A, and also if you follow Myers-Briggs, that ENFJ personality where they are looking to better others and please them. That doesn't make you, submissive to the situation. It just means that you're honestly trying to do the right thing and lift someone up and better them. And, that's the whole reason someone becomes a nurse or a doctor or a teacher. And so those 5 things, when you really pour into it, have spun out of control really since about 2010, and especially since the pandemic. And so, but at the top of that list, I deliberately mentioned expanding volume work in the face of less time. And I mean, I can't tell you how many articles in Education Week or from the NEA I read seemingly once a month where someone mentions it's just too much in too little time. I just don't have enough time. I mean, it's phrased in different ways, but that's the pervasive thing. And so those 5 things have really been concerning. And what I want to mention is you can actually tie all 5 of those things into workflow. What am I doing? How am I doing it? Do I feel like I'm alone when I'm doing it? Can I never escape my workflow? Is my workflow insufficient and I'm now disappointing others? And it really, I believe, not that it covers every aspect of it, but workflow changes would help address all 5 of those.
That's so powerful because and reading your book and listening to you talk, I mean, you see what you're talking about, but at the time when you're in the classroom, so it so much would. One of the first things you made me think about when you talked about having access, when I was a principal, when my kids were little, I coached my kids in soccer, right? And so I had to be in 2 this place for this one because of the age he was, and this place and this one is that age. And, Saturday, you got to balance it somehow, right? And I'm at this one, and I don't live in the same community where this school was, right? He came and found me at this soccer complex, and he said, "I thought I heard that you said that you were coaching this." Someone heard that where I was going to be that coming weekend, and it was all about signing a form so his daughter could get do her driver's license test. All right, and I was like, "You, all is good."
Yeah.
But in this age of texting and all kinds of stuff, like you said, boy, that just really, it's just amazing. But even as isolation, because a lot of things that happen in teaching is that you can go into your classroom where you think you literally feel like you're the only one that's dealing with this because you have to close your door or whatever. Some of the best teaching that I ever got a chance to do was where they brought up teaming ideas from the middle school into the high school, and that helped because you're with other people, and as soon as you got to be in the right team, it's like, oh, this is nice because you got to be creative together.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you think, there's a lot of schools that use the PLC model for lesson planning and unit planning and, just how are we going to address big projects in the school and stuff. But the day-to-day operations of being a teacher, you may have a great PLC, but let's be honest, like you're the one delivering the plan. And if you're a solo principal in an elementary school, you can talk to your other principals, but when push comes to shove, it's you. And that was, to be honest, that was a hard adjustment for me coming out of the ER where everything is teamwork. Everything is teamwork. And I didn't mind the responsibility. I mean, I kind of liked it, to be honest, but there were days where I was like, oh, I just wish someone else were in this room right now to see this, or watch this unfold.
Right.
And I think that is, humans are made to be social. My brother is an introvert engineer, and even he would tell you humans are made to be social. So
that's so much so. All right. So, one of the things that I got to make sure I mention here is that you talk about the importance of utilizing the problem-solving pathway and that you adapted from the CDC. Can you go into that just a little bit?
Yeah, sure. The CDC, when you look at some of the hardest projects they took on, like HIV/AIDS in the 80s, or, trying to temper down the rates of polio virus or things like that, they did these complex, multi-year, amazing plans. But when you look at the actual planning process, it boiled down to 4 questions. And they still use this model. And I was fortunate to do a fellowship with them and just kind of learn many things, this being one of them. But it's these 4 questions. Number 1, do you actually know what's the problem? When something's unnerving you and you're feeling emotion about it, do you actually know what the problem is? And most of us can do that pretty easily. It gets a little harder when you ask the second question. Okay, what are the causes driving the problem? If you say the problem is student behavior, okay, but what's driving the changes in student behavior? And now do that in a fair manner. Let's be honest, like step back and get some evidence as opposed to just anecdotal, emotional rants, and looking at it. And then the hardest one of all is question 3. And that is, can I design changes or implementations that will mitigate the causes driving the problem? Because it's not about just like, you're not addressing the universal problem of student behavior. I want my kids to behave well. No, you got to go find the things that are driving their poor behavior or the consequences that you don't like and mitigate that. And then ultimately you'll see better behavior. The 4th question is, can I implement it? And educators are really good at that. If there's a good idea that's worth their time and it doesn't cost too many dollars, it'll get done, right? But why this really matters is, and I think we're going to talk about this in just a second, but I got a little frustrated with schools relying on, well, self-care will fix teacher burnout. No, it won't. I think self-care is valuable. I think self-care has its place. I think it's wonderful. I play guitar at the end of the night rather poorly to unwind. I go for runs in the morning to deal with my type A idiosyncrasies, and that helps me settle in for work. I do a lot of self-care. I believe in it. But if you use the CDC model, let's go back to the driving cause of burnout for a teacher. I have way too much volume of work. How is $5 off Chick-fil-A or playing guitar or taking a run in the morning going to mitigate the volume of work you have? It'll make you feel good for a little bit, and that has value. I'm not dismissing that. But when I got my 270th, self-care email that year, I was just like, friends, there's a better way to do this. Let's actually start creating operations that give people time. And one of the ironies of self-care for me was I had no time to do the self-care, or I felt like I didn't. And so I'm not trying to pick on it. I still use it. I still believe in it. It's a good thing. But my whole thing was, let's be nerds for a second and look at the operations of the daily day of a principal or teacher. And let's start creating time for them where they notice it. And we're actually mitigating the driving forces that are burning them out instead of giving them a pretty picture or a Band-Aid that has nothing to do with the driving forces burning them out.
It's so powerful. This, and we're not going to go through every chapter, but this is a big chunk of chapter 2, which is titled "Understanding Why Self-Care Is Not Enough." And it's the good thing is that the audience can't see me, but I'm smirking and stuff like this because I've as I was reading the chapter, I was doing the same thing because it's like they mean well. I mean, it's
no, exactly, and it's and that's where we have to step outside the box. And I think, and let's be honest, if you're a maxed out administrator and you got 1,000 things going on in your life, which I think every administrator in America does, it's just a lot easier to send another self-care initiative via email. And what really needs to happen both in the administrator's life, who is working way too hard, as well as the teachers that they're supervising who are working way too hard, is how do we all stop the bleeding, so to speak, and let's actually design some operations in our building at the building level that are going to create more time for us. Like that is our now goal. And just like any initiative, by the way, it's change. You're going to fear it. It's, you don't know if it's going to work. I can give you all the data in the world and I can connect you with schools that have done it, but you still don't know if it's going to work in your building, but in the end, spending the time to do that, to gain you time back, that's an actual return on your investment. That's like metaphorically stocks 101. I'm going to put some money in to see money later. I'm going to put some time in to finally get some time back. Because just running with our joke, I love Chick-fil-A. It's great, but it's not going to fix my driving forces that are making my job take me down.
It's so right. It's like, and then over the years that I've been in education, there's a lot of different things that take the place of that. But it's kind of like the person who says to you, now don't get me wrong, I'm not, just like you just said, I love having that. All right, I love getting it. If you want to give me a gift card, stuff like this, I love it. My all-time favorite one is when someone means well and they give you a gift card and you don't drink coffee, and that's to that special coffee house, and you're less like and so then you try and use it on something else there, and you go, this is not really my thing at this place, but it's just it's interesting because you try and figure out how to what might work, but sometimes you run into, once again, a well-meaning person who might say, hey, you doing all right today? And they don't wait for your answer, by the way. It's like, well, I'm glad to hear it. You keep up the good work. Thanks. Have a great day. What was that? So anyway, it's rough. I mean, I think one of the problems with self-care is that, a lot of times if we knew how to fix ourselves, we'd do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing that I struggle with is, again, I engage in it, but this is a systemic problem with school operations, not individual schools, not individual school districts. It's a systemic problem with how the pressure points and preconceived expectations that have been placed on educators from California to New York, right? And so what I'm getting at is we got to change the systemic operations, because the word self implies go fix yourself. And our teachers and principals have done a whole lot of compensating. Let's give them some operations that say, we can change the system, by the way, and make your life better.
That's so important, so important. All right, so before we go any further, I got to make sure I get you to this point. In the formatting of your book, You have some reproducibles. Could you share why these were included? Because it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So the book has 5 specific action items. I've been talking about, school operations, the five specific operational changes we can make in schools that scale from healthcare. We know it works in healthcare. We know it should work in schools. And I can proudly say, the book's been released for a while. I can proudly tell you that districts have adopted it and it does work in schools, right? But these 5 operational changes focus on workflow, and the measured outcome is time. Workflow and the measured outcome is time gained, as well as, how did the teacher or principal self-efficacy and self-worth change over time? And so far that's been positive. But when you share plans with people, there are 2 ways you can do it. Theoretical, explain how it should work, which has to happen. That occurred in the chapter in the writing. And bless my editor for making the writing more clear. And then there's the actual, here's your blueprint. So I've talked about the concept. Now let me give you the templates. And, I was just really excited. Solution Tree backed me up in this. I'm like, hey, when we write this book, I'll do my absolute best explaining the concept, but I don't want to do this unless we hand them like very specific documents. So here's what the principal uses. Here's what the teacher uses. Here's what the CNI uses. And let's give them everything they need. And they might look at it and say, oh, I don't like Chris's version. I'm going to change it to this. But the point is, there are, I'm going to cheat here and look in the book. I don't know. There's like 75 pages of reproducibles. So it's not just 1 or 2 or 3. It's like tons of, here's how you introduce this to your staff. Here's how you scaffold a PLC to model it. Here's how you get your trial team of teachers to start it. And here's how you spread it from the trial team to all the teachers. We're going to take you every step of the way. And I just, as a detail-oriented operational nerd, I thought that was important, and that actually goes back to how we taught residents. Hey, let me explain to you the concept of a spinal tap. Let me model it for you. Let me draw it out for you. Let me help you do the first one in a small environment. Now you do some on your own. Now go show others how to do it. And it was just, we stole that scalability, and teachers just jump on this and they get it. It's innate for them. Same with principals. But I wanted to do that, not because I didn't think they couldn't understand the concept and do it on their own. They were busy. So let me do the work for you. And here's the templates. Literally go run them on your photocopier, hand them out. Your work is done. And feel free to modify my language or my concepts or line out number 4. I don't care. It's your school. I just wanted to give you 99% of the work.
And it's awesome. And just wish I'd had it back when I was in those positions. Good stuff. Well,
you're being humble. You have a very impressive career. I probably should have ran all these by you before I published it. But no, it's just you look at those good, well-meaning people that are swamped, and I just wanted to do the work for them, and they can adapt it any way they want, but at least they know they've got something.
That's awesome. It's a very practical tools to be able to use. I love it. All right, so I got to get you to do this. The title of your book is Triage Your School, A Physician's Guide to Preventing Teacher Burnout. And so you got to tell everybody what you meant by Triage Your School, because there's got to be a point to that.
One of the 5 action items, as you might guess, is the art of triage, which if your knowledge of the word triage comes from Grey's Anatomy, sorry to disappoint you. It's not some medical miracle. It's a workflow operation. And gotcha. I wanted this to be the title, and the publisher agreed, because we thought out of all the 5 operational models, this one was the most important. And we thought it was the most important because I don't have enough time is the biggest educator complaint. And what triage does is it fundamentally explains to someone and resets their perspective of, hey, there is no scientific way you can be all the things to all the people at all the times, but you're trying. And so what we're going to do is set up a workflow system. We're going to agree as a building, from principal to assistant principal to teacher to paraprofessional. What are our number 1 priorities? There's going to be a group of them. Maybe we have 5, maybe we have 7, maybe we have 11, whatever, it's building choice. Number 1s will be dealt with first. I don't care if you want to say, well, I could do this one thing really quick. Nope. Do your number 1s first. Then you're going to do your number 2 priorities. Then you're going to do your number 3. And then we as a building are going to agree, once you hit a certain spot and covering your priorities, we want you to go home. Well, when we did that, educators' heads kind of exploded a little bit, because I'm going to pick on myself as a science guy and whatever. I'm like, no, I need my classroom perfectly set up for tomorrow's lab. I want things a certain way. I probably have undiagnosed OCD. I was just like, I need things to be the way I want them. And well, that was keeping me from walking out of the building until 4:30 or 5 a lot of days, And what schools have started doing who triage is, as a professional educator, our level 1, 2, and 3 responsibilities on a 5-level scale, we believe really need to be tackled before you go home. Some days, most days, you're only going to have level 3, 4, and 5 stuff. But maybe someday you have something very serious, like a student who's a level 1 or 2 because they say some things that maybe looks like they might want to hurt themselves, right? That now becomes your top priority. But most days you're not going to have level 1 emergencies or level 2 concerns. You're going to be living in the level 3 world. The point is, level 4 and 5 really don't have to be done. They could wait a day or 2 or 3. It will annoy you because you're no longer the 100% educator you used to be. But here's the thing. The reason we use this model in healthcare is, as a former ER doc, I would never sign out high-level priorities to the oncoming physician. That's just not good practice. I'll take care of them. But once I hit an agreed upon point, I left. Why? So I wasn't burnt out for my next shift. Teachers need to be doing the same things. And if they say, well, my activity for tomorrow won't be perfect, or I won't have all my papers graded, my answer to you is, I'm pretty sure your principal and your community would love 87% of the awesome person you are, instead of 100% for 2 years until you quit, or 100% for 10 years and you have a meltdown and quit. And that's not encouraging slacking, because as a building, we're going to agree the level 1 and 2, 3 stuff, whatever we deem that to be, that's being a good educator. So now when I get through that, I can be like, I did everything we as a team, the team that I respect and admire, says I need to do before I can go home. It's only 3:37. Wow, this is weird. I'm going to walk out the door, which means tomorrow morning, admittedly, my lab's not perfect. So, hey, boys and girls, hop up while I'm talking, assemble this. Let me show you how to do it. Get this. I've set out these flasks, but you're going to have to pour it in there. Okay, good. Now we're all prepped. Was that 100% of what Chris Jenson could have been? No, maybe more like 90. But Chris Jenson went home, spent time with his family, got to see his kid's soccer game, and he's happy when he comes back the next Thursday morning for lab instead of angry at the world. And this triage workflow process it pulls everyone together. We agree what has to be done before we leave. We also agree that once we hit that point, we're going to force each other out the door, because some of us are going to try and stay. Nope, you're going to leave. You're going to go home. We want you to enjoy your life. And it started cutting back work time. And people were leaving earlier in the districts that have been using this. And if you're wondering, well, when did they get to the level 4 and 5 stuff? Hey, every once in a while, let's be honest, you do have an easy day. And that's when you crank through your level 4s and 5s. Oh, now I can write this kid's recommendation. Or, oh, now I'll finally look at this Spanish teacher's application. And it's just got to be done. And I look at the educators in America, and, there's a spectrum of performance, but the overwhelming majority of them are excellent. And 87% or 92% of excellent, if you're dropping to that capacity instead of your previous 105%, I assure you 92% of excellent is still really great. And I'd be happy for you to teach my 2 children.
That is so powerful. I mean, this is, because it is one of those, the world, you really do get on that plane. If you care about what you're doing and you want to do well, and you're disappointed by the fact that you couldn't deal with all these different things, then it just really kind of sits on your shoulders and stuff. And it's why I had to, as we're getting close to finishing up, why I had to make sure that I shared. I mean, one of my favorite sections in your book is action item 4, negotiating work demands. And in this section, you have a segment titled "Why Educators Take On So Much." So what do you think?
So I appreciate you bringing that up too. Let me give you a great example. You're a well-meaning, highly trained educator, and I know if I came to you, I feel 100% confident. If I said, "Hey, would you help out with this?" You're going to say yes, even though you probably don't want to or have the time. And so what they started doing at some of the leading health systems in America was forcing their physicians and nurses, and they thought it was beneath them initially, forcing them to create a pie chart of what they do at their job, right? And so when someone would come to them, they had to pull out the pie chart. Everyone felt silly at first, but then say, you know what? Here's what I do. And it no longer became a yes or no decision. It was, I would do that if you would take this off my plate. Or I could do that for you if you remove these two things. Or I could do that for you if you blended it into this and took me out of the clinical circuit for 10% of my time so I had time to do both. And suddenly people felt like they could negotiate instead of a yes or no choice. And I think what happens with educators is we ask them to do something for the school or the community, and they feel like they're darned if they do and darned if they don't. Well, if I say yes, I have more crap on my plate. And if I say no, I'm going to feel guilty about it. And what happened in these school districts that started using this was every staff member had posted online in a Google Drive that only the staff could see, here's what I do. And so all of a sudden, a department chair might say, I noticed you're a club sponsor for this. There's a brand new teacher that has time that's willing to take that off your plate. If you could do this for the science department. And when everyone agreed upon it, the principals loved it because all of a sudden the teachers were making the decisions of who does what, and they no longer felt like the bad guy. Now, it doesn't have to run that way, but the point is, as a building, instead of feeling like we have to get forced into a yes or no decision, why don't we just look at and advertise what's on our plate and make trades? And all of a sudden, if we do it right as a building, everything still gets done. But now on your plate are the things you actually want to do.
That's so awesome. I love it, because you are talking to someone who I really wanted to follow that principal to the new school where he was going. And the discussion he had with me was, I really would love to have you there, but I need a yearbook sponsor. And
exactly.
I'd bought yearbooks. What the heck? Never done one before. But so then I got the fun job of doing the first one with 8th graders. It's like nice. But, it's such that information you're talking about is so important because it is something that we do tend to say yes. And and
yeah, and it's
barter.
in our nature and it makes sense. And so these workflow pathways really, with all the resources and the reproducibles and the chapters in the book, are meant to set up an operational approach to some of these stress points where you no longer as an individual feel guilty for exercising the operational approach. And it's really a save yourself from yourself model in a lot of situations. And it's also a revamping the system so that, we're creating more time. And, it's just like a lot of educators going back to triage are floored that they can actually accomplish all the things that they think need to be done to run a school well. And they look at level 4 and 5 and they're like, I guess you're right. I guess these really could wait. And it's yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Go home.
Nice. Love it. We're getting close here to finish up. Chris, where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more?
I appreciate that. I have a website. My business is called Diagnosing Education. So it's www.diagnosingeducation.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. And then if you want to Google Solution Tree or Amazon, the price is sometimes cheaper on Amazon, hint. But it's for my book, Triage Your School. Triage Your School on Amazon or Triage Your School in Solution Tree, and you can find it that way.
So cool. And I'll put that information in my show notes so it's easy for them to find you. And one last question. It goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given a chance to say thank you?
Oh my gosh, I have a lot. Coaches and teachers that really shaped my life. But off the top of my head right now today, I would say Eric Curry, honors physics teacher who humbled me, but pushed me in a good way. And I got used to hearing from him. And what were you thinking when you did that?
Nice. I like that. That's very cool. Dr. Jenson, Chris, thank you so much for talking with us about your book, Triage Your School, A Physician's Guide to Preventing Teacher Burnout. Awesome. I love the information, the practical paths that you described as addressing teacher burnout. Wish you the best in all you do.
Well, thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure to be on your show.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.